Hi everyone, I want to show you something pretty cool. It's a way to make flowers as you're working each row or round if you like. That way you don't have to sew them on after. I've used a very similar technique for my Bloom As You Go blanket. This one's a little bit different, so I thought I'd just show you quickly. So I've used this particular technique for like a scarf, a fun scarf. And I've also used it for some cup cozies, which I'll have a pattern on the blog shortly for as well. So the main thing is that whichever stitch you want to work your flower into, you have to set it up so that you have enough stitches to make that flower from. So in the case of this scarf, I'm going to be doing that in the middle of the scarf. So I've just got to the middle and I'm going to make a double crochet stitch, which some of my petals are going to go around. I'm going to make a puff stitch. It's a modified puff stitch, which is going to become the center of my flower, and then I'm going to make another double crochet, which some of my petals will go around. Then we have to do something right at the end as well, but I will show that to you once we get there. So I've got a double crochet. I'm going to make a modified puff. So yarn over first, insert the hook, yarn over and pull through a loop. So I'm going to do that, yarn over, insert the hook, yarn over, pull through a loop. I'm going to do that until I've got 9 loops on my hook. I mean, you can make this puff as thick or thin as you like. It's really up to you, but the main thing with the modified puff is when you finish off the puff, yarn over and you pull through all but the last loop on the hook, and then yarn over and pull through both those loops. It just makes it a little bit taller and a bit more even. It doesn't lean over to the side, which is useful for the center of the flower. So what I'm going to do now is make a double crochet in that same stitch. Right, and this is where it gets interesting because we're going to now start making our flower, which is a bit of fun. So, I mean, you can make 5-petal flowers or you can make 6-petal flowers. I'm going to show a 6-petal flower, but I'll show you how to vary it if you're making a 5-petal flower instead. So, in the case of the 6-petal, I'm going to, and again, you can make these flowers bigger or smaller. Let's just make an example flower. The main thing is knowing which stitch posts and loops to make the petals on. You can change how those petals appear, the stitches in those petals as you like, but the main thing is to know which stitches to use. So I'm going to use a chain 4 to start my petal. I'm going to use a triple crochet cluster. So I'm going to yarn over twice, yarn over, pull through a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, then I'm going to double yarn over again. And I'm inserting my hook around that stitch post there of the last double crochet stitch that we made. Yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over and pull through all 3. So I've made a triple or treble crochet cluster there. And now I want to complete the petal by chaining 1, 2, 3, 4, just so it's symmetrical, and stitching back through into that post there. So I've made 1 petal over the last double crochet stitch post that we made. I'm going to make another petal over it, so I'm just going to do exactly the same thing. So I'm chaining 4 and then I'm going to make my cluster stitch again. Like I said, you could make any petal shape that you want, really. It's more about the technique and which stitches and loops that you use. So chain 4 again. And we're going to slip stitch back over that same stitch post again. So we've basically used that stitch post, the last one we made, last stitch we made, the double crochet, to make 2 petals. Now, if I was going to make a 5-petal flower, I would skip this next location to work the petal. But if I'm making a 6-petal flower, I'm going to use this next location. So just underneath where we've worked into the front loop and back loop for the puff and the 2 double crochets, you'll find a loop here. We're going to use that for our 3rd petal for a 6-petal flower. So I'm just going to slip stitch into it. So you have to slip stitch into each location as you want to make a petal in a new location. So I'm going to make the petal exactly the same way as before, like so. 1, 2, 3, 4, and we're just going to work just 1 petal down the bottom there. All right, so we're going to do 6 petals and we have 3 so far. And now we're going to use a new location for the next petals. So we have used the double crochet stitch post, we have used a loop underneath the stitch that we use for the double crochets and the puff, and now we're actually going to use the first double crochet that we made in that same stitch from the previous row. So I'm now going to slip stitch into that. Every single time we want to work a petal in a new location, we just have to slip stitch across to it. Chain 4. Right, so in this stitch post, like with the last stitch post, I'm going to work 2 petals just to make it even, also because we've got a lot of space there. So I'm just, again, whatever petal design you settle on, just make it consistently in each of those locations. So I'm just going to go ahead and make that, so I can show you where the last location will be in the case of 6 petals. So like I said, if you were making 5, you could just skip that particular location down the bottom there. Okay, so now I am going to slip stitch into the last location that we're going to make the petal. So this is the puff, modified puff stitch here. In the middle of that puff stitch there's a little bit of a hole, which I'm calling an eye, and what we want to do is slip stitch into that, like so. And that's where we're going to make that last petal. So it's exactly the same principle again, making sure that we make our petal exactly the same way that we made the other ones, just so they look nice and consistent. Unless you want your petals to look different. I mean, some flowers do have slightly different looking petals, don't they? But anyway, for the sake of this particular demonstration, we're just gonna have all the same petals. All right, so we have now completed our 6 petals. Now, the thing that we need to do so that we're maintaining the stitch count for the next row is to make sure we replace, because we've actually used every single stitch that we made in the stitch from the previous row. So we've used the first double crochet we made, we've used the puff stitch we made, we've used the second double crochet that we made. So we want to leave a stitch for the next row. So what we need to do is actually look at the back here, and we're just going to make another stitch in exactly the same stitch that we've been using previously for those 2 double crochet and the puff stitches. So you'll find at the back, and I'm just going to show you there, see how that stitch has been used for those other stitches. So yarn over, and we're just going to make a double crochet, because that's with this scarf I've been using double crochet as the main stitch. I mean, if you were using a different stitch, then you'd use that, like a half double crochet, whatever it happens to be, but I've been using double crochet. So now I've basically ensured that my stitch count is going to remain the same by just inserting another stitch into that stitch from the previous row, because we used up all the other stitches that we made before on the flower. And then you can continue as you were. The same principle applies if you're working it around, exactly the same thing in terms of making the stitches. So anyway, that's what I wanted to show you, because it's a bit of fun, and it's a really easy way to make, some cute flowers and projects. And yeah, I mean, if you don't have to take the time to sew something on, why do so? I mean, especially, for something, a small item like a cup cozy, you can whip it up really quickly. Well, I hope that's helped. If you've got any questions, let me know. Bye.